Genesis 25 and 26 is what we'll be covering in the next bit of time. This is going to start off again. We're going to be in the story of Jacob and Esau at the beginning, and then we're going to go back into some of the story of Isaac. So this is really talking about Isaac's life. He's gotten married. He has Rebecca as his wife, and now we're going to continue in his story. Right? We finished all the many chapters of Abraham's narrative, which were very long. Isaac is a much shorter story. And his narratives are a little shorter, but it's important because we walk through some of his life, but then also it sets up the life of Jacob, which will take up another large portion of the narratives. So let's just jump back in. So if we remember, Isaac has gotten married to Rebecca. They'd gotten her from the land where Abraham's family was and brought her to Isaac. And so Abraham is still alive, but Sarah has passed on at this point. So Abraham, again, and we're going to jump into Genesis 25, verse 1. And it says, Abraham again took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuha. And it goes on to talk about these sons. And so, again, there's a lot of sons here that Abraham goes on to have. He lives 38 years past Sarah's death. And in this time, he has 6 sons listed, and then a set of grandsons, and a set of great-grandsons even listed. And so Abraham is starting to see his generations multiply like he was promised. We find out that, it really was Sarah who was barren. When Abraham, he had a child through Hagar, and then he goes on to have this next wife, and she is going to bear him lots of children, right? And so he goes on to have lots of children after Sarah. Now, these are not the children of promise. Only Isaac is. And so, again, we also read in 1 Chronicles 1:32 that Keturah, his wife here, is sometimes referred to as a concubine, but here she's referred to as a wife. So again, that's not always clear exactly, but obviously they were having children after Sarah was married. After Sarah had died. And so Abraham is going to kind of set up his inheritance and explain what's going to happen here. So in verse 5 it says, and Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had. And while he was still living, he sent them eastward away from Isaac his son to the country of the east. Okay, and so if we remember, the east is important, right? That's not the promised land. We see a lot of people go to the east, and that's usually just to say that's not the promised land. So Isaac is the only one that's going to inherit the promised land. He's the child of promise. The promise goes to him. Ishmael and all these other brothers or half-brothers are going to head eastward. They're going to be given gifts by Abraham, so they're still loved. Remember, he really did love Ishmael. He was, even before Isaac was born, he thought this might be the promised son. And so, again, it's the best he can do here is give everything to Isaac and then still give gifts to these other sons. Okay, and so in verse 7 it says, this is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave near Mamre in a field. And so again, remember, he bought that. It was where he had buried Sarah, his wife. And then in verse 11, so I kind of skimmed some of that. In verse 11, it says, and it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt in a place in the promised land. Okay, so again, we see that Abraham's living to 175 years old. Remember, in the time of Noah, people were living 800-900 years at times, and so that was more common. But now we're getting quite a few generations from the flood, almost 10 generations at this point. And Abraham's living a good long life, which is 175 years, and we'll find out from Jacob, he lives Isaac, they live about 140 years. So the length of life is getting shorter and shorter as we go away from the flood, until it will become quite short, in fact, at certain points in history. Okay, so he's outliving Sarah by 38 years. He had Isaac when he was 75. So that's a long time. When he dies, Isaac is 100 years old. That's quite old, right? Oh, sorry. Isaac is 75 years old when he dies, and Ishmael's 88 years old. So again, they're quite old. They've lived quite a long time alongside their father. It's considered a good old life. And Isaac is going to live 180 years, so slightly longer than Abraham. And that's considered an old and full of years, according to Genesis 35, 28, and 29. And Jacob will call his days few and evil. He only lives to be 130 years in the land and 147 total. So he lives a decent amount shorter than both Abraham and Isaac by 20 or 30 years. So again, we just see the lifespans starting to shorten a bit, and this is kind of how the patriarchs, but all the patriarchs seem to live a good long time. They don't have early deaths or anything like that. They're well taken care of in that sense. And now we're going to go into another genealogy. If you remember, we had Cain's genealogy, we had Ham's genealogy. Now we're going to have Ishmael's. He's not the promised line. We're going to do this last short part, and then Ishmael's not going to be discussed the rest of Genesis. And so his genealogy runs from verse 12 to verse 18. I'll just pick out some parts. He was born to Hagar, and he had a number of sons. So he has 12 tribal leaders come from his line. Ishmael is going to live 137 years, and then he breathed his last. It doesn't necessarily say where he was buried, so maybe not in the family tomb where Abraham and Sarah are. And so again, he's going to have princes of nations that are not going to be in the promised land, but are going to be around there. Typically, the sons of Ishmael are considered the Arabs or the Arabian Peninsula, the people of that area. And so he does produce a large people group. So as Abraham was being blessed to have many nations come from him, or in the nations and a large people group, it's not just Isaac, but it's also Ishmael, and some of his other sons have a lot of children and tribal leaders and things come from their lines. And so this is kind of the end. The sons of Abraham have been blessed. They've been given gifts, and they've gone on to produce large multiplications of children. And this kind of ends the story now in the narrative of Abraham. And it really moves completely now into the rest of Isaac's story, really setting up in a lot of ways the narratives of Jacob. And so again, Isaac takes up just a little short piece, but we see a lot of character development both in Abraham and Jacob on either side of that, and the way that they interact with God, their faith. And that's the part of Genesis I think we really should be looking at, is how they interact with God. If you remember, Abraham was constantly having these interactions, either with the angel of the Lord in like a personal form, eating, talking to him, hearing a voice from heaven as he's about to offer Isaac. Times he sets up an altar and God meets him. Other times God meets him sovereignly. But we see these interactions go on through the life of Abraham. We'll see that a little less in Isaac's life. We know that Isaac was already a part of almost being sacrificed, and there was a voice from heaven. We assume he probably heard that. It was really his introduction to the covenant. And so he's had some experience with God now. But again, we'll start to see even more of that, especially in Jacob's life. So in verse 19, it says, "This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padam Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived." So again, Isaac was about 40 when he was married, and they're trying to have children. And the same thing happens again that happened to Sarah. They can't have children. Isaac has been also blessed to have a line of kings come from him and many children. So this doesn't make sense. So he goes immediately to God. He doesn't go have an Ishmael. He doesn't try to figure this out. He knows it's God that brings forth children. He is that child, right? He was born to his parents in their very old age. Again, Isaac, and we find that the generations of faith start to build on one another. And isn't that a wonderful thing? Even in our time, we see that happen, whether it be mentors we have it in our church groups or in our natural families, whatever it might be. Usually the way we see other people relate with God, we can learn from that. And that can start to be our normal as well. So he's seen that testimony of God be faithful to open wombs, and he's asking God the same. And so again, he doesn't blame his wife, it doesn't seem. We actually saw Sarah feeling, at times we kind of got her part of the narrative that she felt like, oh, just take Hagar, and we do see that all of Sarah, Rebekah, and even Leah for a short time period have some amount of barrenness, and God has to open their wombs so that the promised child can come. And so you really see that in all of these narratives, God is the one that brings the life. He's the one that's going to have to fulfill these promises. And so as now Rebekah is pregnant, we see in verse 22, "But the children struggled together within her." Okay, so brotherly conflict isn't new. Cain and Abel had already had conflict from the beginning. It's never part of God's plan, but this conflict is not going to stop God from working. So Rebekah prays, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." And so when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. Okay, so she doesn't know what's going on. Something is going on. There's a struggle inside of her, and a lot of movement, which she doesn't think is normal. And so she goes and she asks God, "What is going on? Like, is there something wrong with this child?" Like, you've got to think that there's a lot of feelings and unknowns here, right? They couldn't just go to the doctor and have an ultrasound. So she's experiencing something odd. God tells her she's having twins. We don't know if that was normal or not. This is the first record of twins that we've seen, that's been explicitly twins. We don't know that if any other cases there have been. And again, we see that, so it is something that God tells her, "Oh, look, there's two of them, and they're just struggling right now." And he also tells her something interesting. The one people shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. So from the beginning, they knew that Jacob was going to be the child of promise, and they should have known that. And so as we go through the story, I think it's important to look at Isaac and Rebekah as they've been told this over their children from before they were even born, who was going to be the promised child. And remember, the promise doesn't follow the oldest. Isaac should already know that. But maybe they're thinking something different. Culturally, the firstborn does get a blessing. They get a double inheritance. So if there's 3 or 4 children, the oldest will get an extra portion. So instead of splitting things evenly, they always get an extra piece of land or something extra out of that portions. And so again, it wasn't always true that the younger would be the one to lead or to be the stronger in the relationship. And so verse 25 says, "And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob." So Esau's the oldest and Jacob's the younger. So we already know which line's going to be blessed here. And again, it's just God's grace in choosing whether he chooses the oldest or youngest or what number of birth order. Okay, so Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So they had tried for children for 20 years. They'd been married at 40 and now they're 60. Abraham and Sarah had a promise for 24 years, and they were even married longer than that. So again, this seems like a very long time to be waiting for children. They have to know it's the hand of God that's doing this, and be able to give him the credit for this. Verse 27, the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Okay, so the parents basically choose a child, and they each like one more than the other, or, in that kind of way of maybe not more than, but in a different way. And Isaac really loved Esau because of that he liked to eat the food that Esau would catch and kill. So, maybe venison or game of some sort. And it sounds like Jacob was one who was mild, dwelling in the tent. So he stayed with his mom, just kind of hung around. We'll find out that Jacob doesn't get married till a lot older. Esau gets married younger. Like there's probably large differences in their personality. Also, this idea of food comes up over and over in this story. Esau's going to sell his birthright for food. Isaac's going to be tricked because of the food. Like this food is going to become like a main theme of the story, that their desire for good food starts to override. And I know we can't really see that in the English, but as I was reading a lot of the commentaries and things, they were pointing out that this idea of fleshly desire towards food really does stand out in this passage. There's some word plays and things or repetitions on it. Again, Rebekah is actually following God's choice here a lot closer, as the older shall serve the younger. So her favored child is going to become the favored child of God, right? It or already has. And maybe they're leaning that way towards personality, of which child they're gravitating towards. We're not really sure. That's not really clear, but they did have their affinities there. So in verse 29, now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was very weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." And Esau said, "Look, I'm about to die, so what is this birthright to me. Then Jacob said, swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold him his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils, and he ate and drank, arose and went his way. Then Esau despised his birthright. Now, in their culture, he shouldn't have been selling his birthright. He should have really loved this birthright, and it should have meant everything to him, especially with the covenant promise on it, that the promised child and that covenant, it was going to go to the birthright. It was going to go to the one that was the chosen one. And so he shouldn't have despised this. This shouldn't have been something that he would just sell for a bowl of stew. And it's from Esau that says, I'm about to die. Now, we don't know if that was true or not, or if that's just, he just felt very tired and felt like saying that. Like, this is a narrative. We just have to remember that they're saying their opinions and their feelings, and it's not sure that he was actually close to death or something, and Jacob was being horrible about this and withholding food or something. Jacob valued this birthright. He understood what it meant to be the blessed child, to inherit this promised land. Remember, they don't own any land. And so there is some place here where Esau could be scoffing at this, kind of being like, yeah, right, we don't own the land. And so that he was coming to the point where he despised his birthright and was to so flippantly sell it shows that he had no esteem for the promise and the covenant and the voice of God here. And so, again, we just see a bit more into their personalities and some of the reasons that whether God foreknew that Esau was going to be this way, or what exactly was the point of all that. But the older will serve the younger in this case. And so we do see that starting to play out already as this birthright has now been sold. And that birthright could have been worth a ton. I think maybe Esau would have valued it more if they owned land, right? You would have thought, oh, I'm going to get a double portion or some extra inheritance. And here maybe he's thinking, what am I going to inherit? Some sheep and some tents? Like, there's not a lot here. And I think maybe that's just something for us to consider too. Like, their value system is really what's driving their decisions. And for just a bowl of stew, he's willing to trade this. I mean, you would think he could have gone to the next tent over and got a piece of bread or something else too. Like, so it's not clear that Esau was in desperate need and had nothing possible here or other options. So again, this is just showing God's choice of Jacob over Esau is the right choice spiritually. And so again, it's not contrary to their wishes. Esau is willing to bargain and make this deal. He despises his own birthrights, and Jacob's going to lengths to gain it. So again, this is the way that this goes. And sometimes we just see this playing out, both God's announcing something, but the humans really are walking through that process and agreeing with that decision God has said. So we're going to move into Genesis 26 now, and this is going to go back to really focusing on Isaac. So we're going to leave the Jacob and Esau saga aside for a moment, because it will pick up again. And so the birthright's now been sold to Jacob, and now we're going to move back to Isaac and just talk about the family dynamics in this time and what's going on in the general land. So in Genesis 26, verse 1, there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. So again, this had happened before. Abraham, remember the first famine, fled to Egypt. He left the promised land. And in Egypt, he does that whole thing. Oh, she's not my wife. She's my sister to Sarah. She gets taken in. They end up with a plague. God speaks in a dream to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh kicks Abraham out. Abraham ends up going back all the way up to his original altar spot and having to rededicate himself to the Lord. And the Lord meets him there in that rededication, and he promises to stay in the land. And the next time there's a problem, Abraham only goes as far as Abimelech. He stays in the promised land, goes all the way to the bottom border, but stays in the promised land. And we're seeing with Isaac, Isaac has been told something. Remember when the servant went to go get Rebekah? The thing that Isaac was told is, do not leave the land. Whatever you do, if the woman won't come with you, then I guess he'll have to marry somebody from around here, but he can't leave. And so as there's a famine, what do? Isaac now has to make a choice. So he goes all the way down to Abimelech, to the bottom of the promised land, but he doesn't leave. So that's better than what Abraham did the first time by going into Egypt and having to come out. Again, each of these narratives, and they're saying there was a first famine in the days of Abraham, and this is going to really sound like the same story because Isaac's going to do the same thing Abraham has already done twice and say that his wife is his sister. Well, Abraham, she really technically was his half-sister. But in this case, Rebecca's really not Isaac's sister. She's like a distant cousin or second cousin of some sort. Again, this famine, the barrenness of wives, like it's all very similar, the Isaac and the Abraham story. It's kind of like reliving the whole plot again. In this case, though, there was no Ishmael, right? When she was barren, they prayed to God, they had children. And the famine is bad, but they don't leave the promised land. So he's doing a little better. Like he's learned from the past, right? And so again, now they're there. As they get there, then the Lord appeared to him, this is to Isaac, and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of the heaven. And I will give to your descendants all the lands, and your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." Okay, so this is really interesting. This is God appearing to Isaac and saying, don't leave. Don't leave the land. Whatever you do, Abraham had to leave his family. Remember, he had to really break from them. He even brought Lot with him, which ended up being kind of a mess. But now we have Isaac, and he's told he doesn't need to leave somebody. They're pretty well settled. They're wealthy, it seems. He's there in the land, and God's only instructions are stick it out. Stay in the land. Just don't leave. He's saying this famine might be bad, but it's not that bad. You don't need Egypt to save you. Just stay here. I know you're heading towards Egypt, but don't cross out of the promised land. And he says, and I'm going to do all those things I said for Abraham. Those promises all apply to you. Multiply your descendants like the stars in the heaven. Give you this land. Everybody in the earth is going to be blessed. So he's reiterating all the covenant blessings now to that next generation directly. So if Isaac's missed it or doesn't feel like it applied to him, or maybe it got lost somewhere along the way, God is reiterating, this is for you. And I want you to hear my voice, and I want you to know. And it says the Lord appeared to him. So again, this is probably a face-to-face meeting with God, the angel of the Lord, or some sort of meeting. It doesn't exactly clearly say what it means that the Lord appeared to him, but this is more than just, a disembodied voice or something. I just find it interesting. Sometimes I think we lose that sense when we read these narratives quickly of how God's meeting so personally with them. And he says God is saying some interesting things here. He said, because Abraham obeyed my voice, right? Because Abraham was faithful, this promise is going to continue. And we see this even in the kings. As some of the kings get into real deep idolatry, it actually takes several generations for the promises and the exile to come about. God is so gracious. He allows it to go through generations that maybe aren't quite as faithful. In Isaac's case, he sticks it out in the land and he does the bare minimum and everything that he needs to. And we get the sense that he's circumcised and his children are, and all of the things that go with this promise. And so again, he's not going to have to take as big a step of faith as Abraham did. He's going to have to do some smaller things, but he still needs to do them. And there's some other things in here that's pretty interesting. It talks about how Abraham kept laws and commands and statutes of God. We're not even sure what those exactly mean, because Leviticus and the law of Moses hasn't yet been given. But whatever they were, Abraham kept them. And so again, the way he was doing life was according to the plan of God. And so again, and it seems that this is, now Isaac's story. We're getting that he was headed out of the land, and he's supposed to stay in the land, and he's going to. And so again, we have the whole iterated covenant and everything. He's probably also going to be following the law of God, right? God's kind of telling him, take my commands, my statutes, and my laws, like Abraham, and follow them. We get the sense Abraham did that from his heart. And that's how we follow God now, right? From our heart, the law written on the heart. And so again, that's kind of where we are. And so we see in verse 6, Isaac dwells in the land of Gerar. He listens to God, stays in the land. And then in verse 7, it says, and the men of the place asked about his wife. And he said, she is my sister. For he was afraid to say she's my wife, because he thought, lest the men of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold. So if you remember, that's what Abraham said as well. I lied. She's my sister. Well, in Abraham's case, it was a half lie. In Isaac's case, it's pretty much a lie. And Isaac does the same thing. And we remember Abraham said this at one point. He said to Abimelech, "This was my household policy. We decided when we left my family's land that we would say that she was my sister and not my wife anywhere we went because he didn't want to get killed." Isaac does the same thing. He's willing to put his wife up, basically for someone else to marry and take in. And so he lies about this. It's not very protective of the women in their life. Again, like I said, this is a historical narrative. We don't get a moral commentary on how this is good or bad, that they're willing to give up their wives for their own lives and their own safety. So verse 8, "Now it came to pass when he had been there a long time that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked through a window and saw, and there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebekah his wife. And Abimelech called Isaac and said, 'Quite obviously she's your wife. So how could you say she's my sister?' Isaac said to him, 'Because I said, lest I die on account of her.'" So Abimelech, nobody takes her as their wife. None of Isaac's fears come about. They live there a long time, and no one has tried to take her. But one day, right, Abimelech looks out and sees Isaac being affectionate to her, which, again, remember, this is an arranged marriage, and it says that Isaac actually loved her. He's showing her endearment to his wife openly, and we see that here. And so it seems like they're in a good marriage, even it being arranged, that they really did truly love each other and were in a good place. And so he said, so Abimelech basically calls him out. "Why would you do this? This does not work out well." So again, thankfully in this case, Rebekah does not get taken into anyone's harem. Sarah had been taken into harems twice. And so again, Isaac has wrongly assessed the men of the region. So in verse 10, it goes on, "And Abimelech said, 'What is this you have done to us? One of the people might have soon lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us.' So Abimelech charged all his people, saying, 'He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death.'" So I guess in that time period, it was not okay to take someone else's wife unless you killed them, is more or less what Isaac had assessed, that the only way that if somebody saw her, thought she was beautiful, then they would kill him for her and just take her. But it would not be okay to take her without killing him. And so again, Abimelech says, "You know what? Let's just not do this. Instead, I will just put out an edict. If anyone touches you or touches her, they're going to be put to death." And so Abimelech handles it. He's the ruler of the area, and so he can do this. He just basically issues a death penalty. Again, this in the early narratives with Abraham, God's the one that had to issue the death penalty. He said if anyone touches Abraham or his wife, God would intervene at that point. And so again, like I said, we've seen this scenario play out for 3 times already. And so these children were really important, both the mother and the father in these lines, because these were to be in the line of Jesus. And we see that, that especially with Sarah, she was coming up on time to conceive the promised child. She only had a couple-month window, and she's being brought into someone else's harem. That's a really serious problem, right, for the lineage and everything that's going on. And so the women are just as important in these lineages in many respects as the men. And we see that covenant promise on Sarah that she was going to carry a kingly line and those types of things. So we actually see a covenant made with Sarah just as much as with Abraham. And I think sometimes we miss that. I mean, I open up most books and it says the covenant with Abraham, but we forget that Sarah was part of that covenant. And because, she's married to Abraham, they're in a union, and God is very respectful of that. We'll see that again here with Rebekah. And so then we move on with this. So in verse 12, we're going to again jump back into the land and Isaac. Then Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and a great number of servants. So he puts out to harvest. They have what we would consider a bumper crop, a great yield, right? You plant the seeds and everything just grows. You get the right rains, you get everything you need. This is back before genetically engineered grain. So again, 100-fold is a lot. You put one kernel in, you get 100 back. And so again, things are going really, really well. That's great. His herds are growing. Again, he doesn't own land, but he owns a lot of property. And so even though he's under a Gentile ruler with Abimelech there, and they're present in that area, he's still being blessed. And the Lord is giving credit for his blessing. So Isaac is not like, I'm the best, I did all this on my own. He really is hitting some good notes here. When they're having problems conceiving, they go to God. When there's a problem in her womb and there's wrestling, they go to God. And again here, when they become blessed, they give God the credit for it. So we do see some high points in Isaac's faith and points with God. And so we move on. It says, so the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, and they had filled them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. So now he's become problem, right? You get too much stuff, too many sheep, too much stuff. And so instead of just trying to take his wells, which stop digging wells is a very, very difficult thing, right? You have to dig. If you find water, that's amazing. Like you can dig wells at times and never find water, that they have these and then they're willing to stop them up and fill them full of dirt again. It really shows you they just really want him out of the land. They don't even want to take his wells from him. They really want him gone. So they're seeing this as a major dispute and problem. Again, this is the same problem Abraham had. He had a dispute over wells with the Philistines. And we also saw that there was a problem with Lot and Abraham living in the same area just because of a lack of water resources or even grazing land, whatever it might be. And so again, these disputes are pretty common in Genesis. It seems like anytime God blesses them, they need to separate further from the people around them and really draw that own space in the land. And where are they going to find this and how's that going to work? So Isaac departed from there and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. He called them by the names which his father had called them. So Isaac moves because of the conflict and starts redigging wells. And this is such an important part of their life, to have these wells dug. Again, I don't know why someone would want to fill them in. I would think they'd just take them and want to use them for water, but I guess maybe they just don't want anybody living there. But Isaac is kind of like putting down, remember that there's altars they put down, there was a burial site they bought, and then wells. And this is really their claim to the land. It's the way they're kind of claiming these areas. And so in verse 9, we have also Isaac's servant dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdmen, saying, the water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek because of the quarrel, because they quarreled with him. So he goes out, he digs, they find water, and the people there go, no, that's our water. And now he's got a problem and he has to deal with it. And so the new well causes new conflict. And I don't know if we've ever been in this situation where you feel like you start a new work and you're just trying to get it done. Right? Even in Nehemiah's day, they're trying to rebuild a wall. And what's the next thing that happens? A big conflict. Some sort of enemy or people try to lay claim to what you're doing or what's going on. And it becomes a thing that has to be worked through. So in verse 21, then they dug another well and they quarreled over that one also. So he called its name Sitnah and moved on from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called the name Rehoboth, because he said, now the Lord has made room for us and we shall be fruitful in this land. So Isaac just keeps moving and digging wells until he finds a place where he can be. So, he's saying, I'm trying to start something here. They're not letting me. I really need a place of our own. We need a place for our sheep. We need a place for our fields. We need a place of our own. And so without owning land, you have to keep moving and you have to follow the water sources. Like I said, not all wells that get dug bring up water. Actually, in some places, you can dig a lot of wells and not find water. They're probably looking for springs, natural springs that are underground. They're hard to find. And so, again, as this is happening and he's having some success, then the people there start conflicting again. So again, he takes this kind of as the Lord's guidance. If nobody's going to contest this third or fourth well that I'm at, then obviously the Lord's in it and is going to let me be here. Well, all we know is what the Lord is doing is moving him away from the Gentile Philistines. They're getting some separation. He has his children, his wife with him. He came down there for the famine. Obviously, he doesn't need to stay down there under that rulership. God's just really separating him, trying to get him further out. Go find some new land. Go take that new field. Go into that new area and dig a well there. Just continue to follow the water source until you find this place. So again, we're going to see in verse 23 another part of Isaac's story. Then he went up from there to Beersheba And the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. So again, they build an altar and dig a well because God appeared to them there. It's an important place. They're putting down a marker. This is in Beersheba, so he is coming into a place that is part of the promised land, more central to the promised land, and the Lord appears to him again. Like I said, how many times is he going to have the Lord appear to him in his life? Like, I know these are probably separated by even decades, but even so, like, to have this many encounters with God and the reaffirmation of the promise and the covenant with him, he's telling him, you're going to have many descendants. Right now, Isaac has 2 sons, and you'll find in the story, that's all Isaac has is 2 sons. And so again, it's not like he's going to have a lot of children or something. So he is calling on the name of the Lord. He seems very faithful. And God is responding by saying, your dad was faithful, so I'm going to continue to keep this promise. So again, this separation has now come to a new point of renewal of promise. So he's gone through some difficulties, right? They bring up these wells because this isn't easy. He's going through some pretty tough conflict as he's trying to start something and do something and getting pushed further and further out. And now it's just a point of renewal, a renewal of everything. As he left to go down during the famine, now he's coming back from that famine, right? And so we're just having this place where he again is meeting God. And I think that's important, that there's these coming and going pivot points throughout life where God and us maybe meet in a deeper way, maybe through a way that we're studying our Bible or praying or just an encounter, whatever it might be. There are times where God just impresses something on our hearts to start a new thing that might be hard, go in a new way. And Isaac was generally being perceptive of that. And so again, so we have Abimelech now who's going to come up and visit Isaac. So in verse 26, then Abimelech came to him from Gerar with one of his friends and the commander of his army. So the 3 of them come up to see him. And Isaac said to them, why have you come to me since you hate me and have sent me away from you, right? You just argued with me over 3 wells, and now you're coming here where you found out I had success again, and you're going to come after me and my wells here. But they said, we have certainly seen that the Lord is with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you do us no harm, since we have not touched you, and since we have done nothing to you but good, and have sent you away in peace. Now you are now the blessed of the Lord. Okay, so they are seeing that Isaac is super prosperous. He's rich. He's caught their attention. And they're like, oh, maybe he thinks we sent him away in a bad way. Let's go remind him that we never hurt him. We just sent him away. Like, we're good friends. We're good friends. Let's smooth this over. They want to make a treaty, basically, a peace treaty with him. Abraham had done this with some of the surrounding neighbors. And they want to just stay in good standing. Again, this may not be the perception Isaac had of these people who had just sent them away and quarreled with him for the last year or 2, but they're coming and making good. And I don't know if you've ever been through a situation like that was really difficult. And maybe God's just told you, just give it some time. They'll come around. Like, it doesn't have to be today or tomorrow, but they eventually will come back, and just be ready to have forgiven them and just kind of go on as though it hadn't happened, right? And I think those things do happen quite regularly. We have friends that we have falling out with, or family members, or people in our church. And it seems at the time like maybe it's really a bad situation, and it probably is. And later on, they're like, no, I really don't mean it that way. And if you're in a place to be forgiving and accepting, you can sometimes come to peace over that. Now, it's not always true, but I'm just saying, we're not supposed to be taken by people that are going to hurt us again and those kinds of things, and be deceived by naive trust. But there are times when people really are being sincere in coming and wanting to have peace again, even though they may have been difficult in the past. Again, people do grow. It is possible. And so again, just leaving that open, Isaac here realizes that, okay. And again, they're kind of presenting their case not quite as honestly. They've done nothing but good to Isaac. Well, pushing him out of his wells isn't exactly that. Stopping up his wells isn't exactly that. But again, they're kind of making the point, Isaac, you're really prosperous. You weren't really all that harmed. God continued to bless you. So he made with them a feast, and they ate and drank. So making a feast is a part of a covenant act, to have food and drink with somebody is to be friends. That's very, very clear in this culture. It's very clear in most cultures, but in this one particularly, we just see usually an exchange of food. That's why, like in our communion, it's partly a food thing. We have, bread and grape juice or wine at those communion meals because of that, because it's a covenant act of talking about food. That's what the Passover was. It was the bread and the wine was what Jesus gave his disciples. Then they arose early in the morning and swore an oath with one another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. So they're not going to live close to each other, but they're just saying, we're not going to attack each other. We're not going to come and try to raid your herds, and you shouldn't come raid ours again. So this is a normal peace deal treaty that they're just not going to be enemies and cause each other trouble. Again, it's pretty smart to do if you've caused someone who now is all of a sudden wealthy and powerful, if you've stopped up their wells and caused them all kinds of trouble, or even if your servants have done that, it's good to go back and make peace if instead of having them attack you at some point. So in verse 32, it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, we have found water. So he called Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. So again, right after this peace treaty, they're not going to bug him anymore about these wells. They find more water. And this brings new resource. This brings stability in the land. And now we have this place called Beersheba, which is considered the well of oaths or a well of the seven. It's something along those lines. But it really means, there's an oath here that happened and that he's allowed to stay here. And so he's not going to get pushed out. So now we're going to see verse 34. It's going to move a little bit to the sons of Isaac, what's going to happen with them. When Esau was 40 years old, he took wives, Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. So Esau marries two women of the Hittites of that area, of the land, the promised land from the Canaanites. Again, this was not good. This was exactly what Abraham told his servant not to do with Isaac. Do not let him marry these women. They're coming from idolatrous people. And look, they're a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah, these two women. So Isaac had married at age 40. Esau's doing the same thing. He's marrying at age 40. Remember, they're living to be like 140, 160. And so marrying at age 40, it seems like maybe the maturation process is a little slower. And so, again, that's just kind of the time frame of when they're getting married. The Hittites were the son of Seth from the line of Ham and Canaan. Again, they were not supposed to really be intermarrying. Abraham hadn't even taken a plot of land as a burial from them. He would only pay for it. And so they really weren't supposed to be interacting that much. They would sometimes have peace treaties, but that was about it. And so again, this is causing Isaac and Rebekah a problem. This narrative is before Jacob stealing the blessing. The next one, he already has the birthright. But Rebekah has reasons to be promoting Jacob since Esau is obviously not fit for blessing at this point. And so that's really where we're going to leave the story. This is pretty much where the story of Isaac is going to start transitioning from here into the story of Jacob next. And so, like I said, Isaac's story is very, very short in comparison to Abraham or Jacob. He's kind of this in between. He doesn't really move the faith story forward much. He just holds the blessing, holds the promise, has a couple of meetings with God. And these are the highlights of his life, right? That's all that's being recorded. And we'll see that Jacob maybe isn't going to make great choices of who's going to be the blessed son. He was going to choose Esau. He would have if it was left up to him because, well, he cooks well. And so, again, we'll start to see that in the next piece of this storyline. But I do think that there is some things to just kind of reflect on. Just the way that Isaac met with God, I think, stands out the most. That God is still meeting with him, appearing to him, speaking to him, reaffirming the covenant multiple times. That even though he's kind of this in-between storyline, that relationship with God is central. That when they're having trouble having children or having trouble staying in the land, God is there to affirm those two things to them. This is a big part of their destiny and promise. We don't see a lot of God speaking about the kingly lines or other things at this point. But again, all of that was given to Abraham is now being given to Isaac. We also see Isaac having to work through some very difficult times of these wells being stopped up, needing to be dug. It's almost like a mini war going on through part of his life, just trying to function through these things. And it's not because of something he did wrong. It's because he's being blessed. And the more he gets blessed, the more he needs to separate from the other things of the world and find his own space. And so, in this process that we see them going through, we do see that there is like real character development of their relationship with God. They're saying God's the one moving us around and bringing them into this place of peace and blessing. So I think that's where we'll leave off.